Hi everyone, my name is Martisiute. We'll just wait another minute or two as we have still one speaker from NATO to arrive, as well as for a few more other participants. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So we still have one speaker coming in a minute, but he will be nicely seated when he's here. Sorry about this. And a very warm welcome to everyone here who have come in person, as well as the participants online. Also, a very warm welcome to each and every speaker. That's very much appreciated. Without any further ado, I will introduce each and every speaker. First, we'll start with Jan P. He's the Secretary General of the Aerospace, Security and Defense Industries Association of Europe, ASD. Before that, Jan was the Secretary General of the Swedish Security and Defense Industry Association and played a key role in building a defense functioning interface and dialogue between the industry and the government. Jan, a very warm welcome and thank you for being here. Next, we have Edith Komaromi. She's the head of sector for defense industrial investments in the European Commission's Directorate General for Defense Industry and Space. She also has extensive track record in EU competition policy. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And this brings me to Oliver Cusworth, the Senior Policy Officer at the EIB's Brussels office and a member of the bank's new Security and Defense team. He worked on both the EIB's CES initiatives and its new action plan for defense. Thank you for being here, Oliver. We also have Olga Rozhankovska, International Partnerships Manager at Serhiy Prytula Charity Foundation. She has also served as a Partnerships Coordinator at United 24, the initiative of the President of Ukraine. Her expertise includes IT, innovation, the full cycle of procurement and implementation, and active volunteering roles. We will be joined very soon by Philip Lockwood from NATO. He's the head of Innovation Unit and the architect and founder of NATO's $1 billion Innovation Fund, the world's first multi-sovereign venture capital fund. He was also responsible for the creation of DIANA, NATO's new transatlantic innovation agency. And previously, Philip was a tech lawyer with an international law firm and served in the Canadian Armed Forces. Online, we will be joined at a little bit later stage by Viktorija Trimbel, the managing director at Coinvest Capital at INVEGA, Lithuania's sole national promotional institution. She's also a board member of Litban, and with over 30 years of excellent track record in fundraising, M&A, and strategic governance, she's listed on the top 100 women in tech in Europe in 2022. Before I set the scene and bring forward the objectives of the event, I would like to invite Paul very briefly for 2 minutes to explain EPC's defense and security project in the scope of which this policy dialogue is organized. Paul, you have strictly 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, and thanks for the timekeeping. Welcome to the panel discussion on making defense investable. It's part of our broader EPC project to help mobilize the industrial, the financial, and the human resources that we need for the defense of Europe. Let me start with philosophical first principles, if you will. Defense and security are a public good. As we've witnessed with Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, and I'm sure Ola will be able to tell you about this, without security, a state struggles to deliver any of the other public goods that our citizens expect: education, health, prosperity, energy, a clean environment, social welfare, or good governance. That's the E and S and G, which investors care about. They all depend on D. So if defense is an essential condition for our free democratic societies, it follows that investment in defense is inherently ethical. And when I say that, I mean not just in dual-use technologies, but also in weapons. The philosophical paradox of defense is that we need to spend billions of euros on weapons so as not to have to use them, so as to deter our adversaries. Yet we still see that there are many obstacles and inhibitions to mobilizing the public and private resources that we need for defense. Our project aims to bring together the key players in governments, in the European Union institutions and NATO, the defense industries, the public and private financial sectors, and many other stakeholders to work out how we overcome these hurdles, how we clear these roadblocks. This work has a public and a private face. Our public events, such as the program launch in April and today's panel, aim to raise public awareness, share best practice, and achieve a common understanding of the scale of the effort that's required. In parallel, we're running a series of closed-door roundtables to enable participants to thrash out their differences constructively and to explore the practical solutions we need in a confidential setting. Early next year, we'll produce a first set of recommendations based on this dialogue, which we hope will inform the work of the new European Commission and of the new NATO Secretary General and his team. But for now, we want to listen to your ideas, learn from your best practice, and debate the best way to achieve our objective, making defense investable. Thank you, Maria. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And perhaps the way to start, I would like to remind everyone that your Atlantic area is not at peace. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, Russia's hybrid attacks and sabotage of EU's and NATO's critical infrastructures is the most immediate and long-term threat to the security of Europe. This changed security environment has brought to light major industrial, financial, and military capability gaps of the European defense, and just how neglected the sector has been for decades. I mean, just recently, we did not meet the target of delivering 1 million shells to Ukraine. Ukraine and our own forces continue to face shortages. Higher demand of certain weapons has also led manufacturers to increase prices, sometimes even fourfold. This explains in part Ukraine's crowdfunding activism and activities in order to raise and help the government meet the rising needs. Could I just ask the audience, how many, if you could raise your hands, how many of you would expect your national governments, EU and NATO, to provide for your security and defense in case of a crisis of attack? If you could just raise your hands. Thank you very much. And now, in case of such an eventuality, would you expect to be crowdfunding for defense and security of your country? Thank you. Indeed, about 93%, according to Eurobarometer, of EU citizens expect Europe to do much more when it comes to defense. And 93% expect more cooperation when it comes to defense. Investing in defense is vital. And as we speak, the European leaders are discussing now in the scope of the next strategic agenda, just how about we should merge the different funding and financing needs. So the objectives of today's session is twofold. One is to look at defense investment gap. How much do we need? How much of it can be met with the current military spending? And how much would we need to meet by other means? So for example, in 2022, EDA has for the first time put the figure that there is 200 billion total defense expenditure by EU 27 member states. And just last week, NATO Secretary General has shared the news that 23 out of 32 allies now meet the 2% target. The question is that enough? Is that what is needed for the delivery of NATO's regional defense plans? Is it enough for NATO and EU to maintain technological superiority? And related to this is the second objective, to look at the options. We will draw on the experiences of the EU, the industry, and NATO and Ukraine in terms of how can we bridge the investment gap? What are the optimal use of differing funding and financing instruments? Without further ado, I would like to invite the three first speakers in the first round of debate. It will be Jan, Edith, and Oliver. Each of you have 5 to 7 minutes, starting with Jan, followed by Edith and Oliver, to deliver your remarks and make your presentations. And then we will open the floor for questions and answers. So perhaps I could invite Jan to share the perspective of the industry. How does industry perceive Europe's standing in global military expenditure? Where are we at? Where do we need to get to? What opportunities and barriers do you see? Thank you very much.
You hear me now? Is it on? So first of all, thank you, Maria, for the invitation, and thank you, Paul, for setting the scene as well, what this is all about and how the defense component is actually playing a vital role for sustainable societies. We could discuss this for 4 hours, and I have 7 minutes, so it will be tricky to single out what makes sense. So I've tried to pick a couple of remarks that helps change the perspective or the scoping that we're looking at. But my starting point would be, because there is often a discussion about that, is there a problem with access to finance for the defense industry today? And my very short answer to that is yes, indeed. Despite the war, despite the increased awareness, despite everything that is being said at the defense ministers level, prime ministers level, etc., there is in practice a problem with access to finance. We see a number of banks refusing to grant loans to the defense industry, refusing to grant guarantees to the defense industry, and we see investors shying away from the defense industry for different reasons. So the problem is really there. Is it limited to access to finance? The answer is no. This has become an issue that is related to a misinterpretation of the sustainability criteria, saying that the defense activities are non-sustainable activities, so they cannot go along with ESG criteria in the future. And it has spread over the sector. So today we do have a problem, not just with access to finance, but with access to most kind of supplies, access to skills. Who would want to work in an industry that is seen as non-sustainable? Access to green energy, actually being denied contracts with some energy providers, even though they are state-controlled. Access to commercial technologies, simply by commercial companies saying, we don't want to sell to the defense industry. We don't want to be part of a deliverable on the defense side, etc. So the problem is widespread. I think on the financial community, there are two major reasons for the problem. One is that defense per se as a sector is much more tricky to have an insight into. It's not transparent as any other sector. It's difficult to forecast what are the sales for the different companies, what does the market preconditions look like, and for those businesses that are, or those contracts that are being signed, it's difficult to have transparency about them for reasons of obvious reasons of national security. So it's more difficult for an investor from one perspective to judge when is the return on investment. But another key element is obviously this ESG criteria that has widespread effects today, saying this is non-sustainable activity. And here I would put, if I would have to single out one actor that is not doing its job today, I would say it's the member states, because the member states are really in control of how they apply eco labels, for example, at the national level. They are in control of how they govern the EIB, etc. So there's a lot, when member states are complaining about the financial market actors, there's a lot member states can do on their own, but they're simply not doing it. It doesn't work, that chain of command. Now, let me put that into an overall perspective. Do we have a problem? The answer was yes. This is extremely unfortunate to have that problem now, because what we're looking at is a major challenge that goes far beyond, from my perspective, the war with Russia. I would go as far as to say that the war with Russia is not the most strategic challenge that the European defense industry is seeing. It is probably the most urgent one. It is the priority number one. We need to focus all our efforts on supporting Ukraine here and now. This is clear, so don't get me wrong. But if you look at the more long-term perspective, what we are looking at is a globe that will have 10 billion people by the end of this century. 10 billion. Out of those, if you count the Americans and the Europeans all together, they will make up for 8%. Every second person will be from Africa. Now, it's very tricky to understand what does that mean for the global economy. But there are indeed financial houses that are trying to do those forecasts and see what does this lead to, not in the scoping of by the end of the century, but well from here, 2020 to 2050. And by 2050 already, the Chinese economy is forecasted to be 50% bigger than the US economy. 50% bigger. US economy is forecasted to be on par with India, and all the European countries' leading economies are on a decline when it comes to their relative size. In fact, the European continent as a whole is about to lose 1/3 of its relative size in the coming 3 decades. And if you add, and this is, let's say, a general financial perspective, and this is what fosters defense industrial capabilities as well as all industrial capabilities, because it's all about where you have the money, where you have the market, where you do the research investments, etc. And if you add to that, that we are living through the 4th industrial revolution, which is based on computing power and bandwidth, and is exponential. This is why you have all of these disruptive technologies being so powerful as we speak, and just continuing to be at a quicker path all the time. Then you would realize as well that where would you have the most significant disruptive technologies being developed in the future? In which countries? Of course, where you have the big finances and the big markets and so on. So Europe is really seeing a situation where the European defense industry will have to think about, how do we ensure a leading position in 30 years from now, given that we are losing out as a financial power, given that we are not investing in research the way we should do in any of these technology areas, compared to US, compared to China, we're lagging behind on all of these fronts. If you add one defense component to that particular defense component, so China today is already up to 300 billion in defense spendings, according to IISS, 300. Europe, EU 27 up to 200. China is beyond us already. And they came pretty much from nowhere in 1990s, and now they are beyond us. And their trajectory is going much sharper than the European one, despite everything we do now. If you think, and US is at 825. If you think at the fact that the projection from PricewaterhouseCoopers that China will be 50% bigger than the US economy in 2050. If China would then as well go to investing 3.7% of their GDP, as well as the US is doing today, we would have the biggest defense spend. This is not a trajectory for me. This is just simple logics on the different forecasts that you can see. And in this perspective, I think that what we are addressing here is the spendings. I mean, are the spendings enough? What is the real gap that we speak about? And there are some exercises looking at if we would have spent the 2% target that we had within NATO from 2006 to 2020, then there are some calculations about how much money is that. I think that's the wrong exercise. I think looking at the global development, the demographic development, the economic development that comes along with that is really causing for a headache, because what we would have to do is invest by far more than we've ever done before, still being a small.
Very much, Jan. Edit, perhaps I could invite you now and ask the events team to put, please, the first slide. Thank you.
The first and only one slide. It's just a visual explanation, but I will also tell you. And I must say, I cannot agree more than what Jan said in his intervention. Perhaps just to refer back to the introductory remarks and the fact that I am heading a small team in DG DEFIS, which is dedicated to defense industrial investments within the defense industrial policy. And we are explicitly focusing on access to finance, access to private finance. And we were created end of last year. So there have been work strands, but now there is really a dedicated team, you know, with a label. And I think this shows also the importance of this topic and how relevant it is. I think I will refrain from going into the deterring geopolitical context. I think everyone is very well aware of it. And I think also the economic context and the projections what Jan mentioned are very much highlighting why we are here and why we are discussing this topic. From the EU's perspective, and this is the slide I wanted to tell you, I just wanted to really guide you through what the Commission and the EU has been doing in the past years. And you see that our curve starts in 2015. And this actually means that before that, and that's a long period in the history of the European cooperation, there was no defense industrial policy. This simply didn't exist for the Commission, for the EU. Our journey starts basically with the declaration of President Juncker. And this was relatively shortly after the annexation of Crimea, when the mood started to change, so to say. After the declaration, there have been some shorter, smaller, events. We had the defense action plan. Then, we really started to focusing on defense industry. The Commission proposed the preparatory action and the European defense industrial development programs, which were small pilots. And for the first time, there was some money given to defense research, so not dual use. It was really for the first time defense focused. And in 2021, the game changer came, which was the regulation for the European Defense Fund, which is a collaborative research and development program financed by the EU budget, financed by the European taxpayers for collaborative defense research. And again, here I have to emphasize, it is for defense. It is not for dual use, but we are really defense focused. This is a program which dedicates under the current MFF roughly €1 billion for collaborative research based on capability priorities. And then we all know what happened in February 2022. and we entered in a new era after Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. And the EU had to come up very quickly in an emergency mode with proposals to further support the industry. On one hand, to ramp up capacities. This was the proposal of ASAP, Act for Ammunition Support, where the Commission for the first time supported, the EU supported capacities, so building extra capacities to produce ammunition and missiles. And this is really a 500 million program. So it may not be very big in size or may not seem so, but it is really, really important. And then we also had EDIRPA. The acronym is not very much like, but it is a program to incentivize member states to procure jointly. These were all the emergency responses, but it is clear that we need a more long-term perspective. And on this basis, this year in March, the European Commission and the High Representative presented the first ever European defense industrial strategy together with a proposal for a European defense industry program with an envelope of 1.5 billion euros, which will support, still under the current MFF, the industrialization. So it can be a little bit seen as a continuation of EDF, and would also fuse ASAP and EDIRPA in more long-term programs. So this is the vision, and we also stated very clearly that there is a huge investment gap. And here I come back also to Jan's comment on how to quantify this investment gap. And I agree with you that this has to have a very much future dimension. But the best we did in the defense investment gap analysis, indeed, we calculated how much is missing and how much we should have spent on defense if all member states would have met a target of 2%, which is the commitment under NATO for those member states which are allied countries, and how much of this should have been spent on defense. And I can just give you some updated figures because the DIGA is already 2 years old, and if we recently redid this exercise, and investment gap is 300 billion euros, and it continues growing. So in the last 2 years, it didn't get significantly better, and the defense expenditure gap is 1,250 billion euros. So it's very clear we have to fix the past, and we have to prepare for the future, as also Jan said. Public money will not be sufficient. I think this is also very clear. And here I also would like to refer to the European Council, which is taking place today and tomorrow, where the heads of state and government will gather. The UCO, the March UCO, tasked the Commission to come up with ideas how to finance defense, and the Commission was working on it, and our president Ursula von der Leyen will brief the heads of state and government in these 2 days, so I can't really prejudge what she will say, but of course we are awaiting then instructions from the European Council how to proceed further. So access to private finance has to be seen in this context, and again, Jan asked, is there a problem of access to finance? And we can safely say, yes, there is. There have been a lot of articles, press reports around this topic. And the first time the Commission looked into it was in 2018 in the context of the financial toolbox for the European Defence Fund. More recently and more concretely, we conducted a study to assess the access to finance, to equity finance for defense SMEs and mid-caps, and also conducted an extensive public consultation with stakeholders in the drafting process of the European Defense Industrial Strategy. Maybe just from the study, some very interesting insights. access to finance for defense SMEs is a headache. So a significant portion of them say this is a major issue. And we can also see that, of course, SMEs are always more vulnerable on the financial markets, but it was also clear from the study that it is a bigger problem for them than for the general population of SMEs. We also see that the ecosystem for defense investors is less developed than in the United States, but even compared to the United Kingdom, the investors for defense are lacking. And all these considerations were reinforced by the qualitative input received in the European Defense Industrial Strategy consultation. Why is this a problem? Our companies cannot grow, cannot innovate, cannot be competitive, and cannot deliver their function to contribute our common security and defense. We also assessed what are the roots of the problems. And then here we saw that the problems derive from two themes. So on one hand, of course, the defense industry seems complicated for the outsiders. There is a lot of rules, regulation, there is sensibility of information, there is export control. So this is very difficult sometimes to understand, but also causes extra costs. And that means that this extra layer of complexity may deter financial sector actors to engage with industry. And the second is, as Jan also mentioned, the sustainability considerations. And what we see is an extreme over-compliance with the ESG framework. And I will state now it very clearly, and we gave this message in the European Defense Industrial Strategy as well. And this is a very high-level message from the Commission and the High Representative, that there is nothing in the EU sustainable finance framework which would prevent investment in the defense industry. So this is something which is a takeaway for everybody, and we will repeat the message wherever possible. The problem remains that there is the overcompliance, also because there is a perceived risk of reputation, and there may be a higher cost of due diligence when you comply with the ESG framework. And then this is a problem. And I also resonate Jan's message here that the member states have a big role to play here, and they can also make things move through the eco labels, but also through public banks, where they public banks have exclusion policies, which is a signal to the market. And of course, the EIB, the Commission called up the EIB to go beyond dual use and engage in defense. But I also have to add that the Commission very much welcomes the recent developments in the EIB, the action plan for defense, and the change of interpretation for dual use. And we think this will be very important to unleash more money for the industry. But of course, we still maintain our message that this should go beyond, and the exclusion policy for weapons and ammunitions and equipment dedicated for military use be scrapped. But I think this is a very good moment to hand over to Oliver, but later I'm very happy to reply to questions.
Thank you very much, Edith, for painting this very clear picture. Oliver, indeed, you're next. Yeah, we're under a lot of pressure, so really looking forward to hearing more about the change learning policy and dual use definition. If I could ask the events team to please hit slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Jan had no slides, Edith had one, and I have about 10, so I think we're going in the wrong direction down the panel. But I do have a few slides, just because I'm going to be talking about sort of specific changes that the bank is making, so it might be useful to put them up, just because it can be a little bit abstract when we start going into financial instruments and dual use definitions and so forth. So, but if we skip to the second slide, I think Jan and Edith did a much better job than I did of the geopolitical context. So we can talk about what the bank is and sort of where it is in this access to finance discussion at the moment. Based in Luxembourg, 10,000 staff, follow the bank for the member states of the European Union, trying to fulfill policy goals with a suite of financial instruments that we have, traditionally very big in infrastructure and cohesion, and then in the last 10 years, climate finance. Since the war in Ukraine began, the EIB has come under increasing guidance from our political leadership, the shareholders of the bank, the 27 member states, to try and see what we can do for the security and defense sector in Europe. And what you see up there on the slide is language which has been already agreed on in previous European councils, calling on the bank to basically see if we can take what we do for dual use and make it more relevant for the defense sector, while safeguarding our financing capacity. That's a reference to how the EIB is funded. We issue bonds on the capital markets, which are then bought by investors around the world. So we have to bear that in mind in any discussion that we have on the defense sector. So recent developments, our president, Nadia Calvino, has recently had her Security and Defense Action Plan approved by the bank's board of directors. And just last Friday, the bank's board of governors, which are the finance ministers of the EU, have approved our strategic roadmap for the years ahead. And if you go to the next slide, please, you can see that that roadmap is 8 priorities for the EIB. And of course, climate is the top, and we are still the climate bank, and I think that's going to remain the case. But you'll see that the third priority now is defense, and I think that's quite important, because for the defense to be third, and it is meaningful that this list order of priorities. I think that's a sort of a bit of a sea change for the EIB, and the fact that that's now been approved by our highest level of governance, I think is an indication of the political will which is behind the bank to try and do as much as we can within the restrictions that we have. So what are we doing? The next slide will lays out what it is in the 4 pillars of the action plan for security and defense, which is a new dual use approach, doing more for SMEs, the creation of a defense department in Luxembourg, which we call the one-stop shop, and strengthened partnerships. The dual use approach is, until now, required 50% of all projects that the bank finances had civilian revenues. So if a project had 51% military revenue, it would not be eligible for bank financing. So that's changing. We're going to get rid of that 50% revenue test, which will expand, we believe, quite extensively the universe of projects that the bank can finance in security and defense. Second pillar, SMEs. We talked a bit about signals from banking and from politics to banking, and I think this is quite important, because it's a changing of the rules which will allow partner banks across Europe to be able to finance more SMEs in the defense and security sector. There are still some restrictions, but we've identified quite a large number of SMEs in the tier 2, tier 3 supply chains who at the moment have not been eligible for EIB financing through our partner banks, which will be under this change of rules. The Defense Department, the one-stop shop in Luxembourg, is bringing together the different instruments, both from the bank and our sort of little brother, the European Investment Fund, which is a subsidiary focused on venture debt and private equity in one place. So defense business across Europe has a single entry point into the EIB group, where it can find out if it's eligible for financing, if its projects can be supported. And we are also trying to boost some partnerships that we have with defense actors in Brussels and across the member states, because in-house we don't really have the defense technical expertise to appraise projects as much as we would like. So we're looking next week we're signing an MOU with NATO Innovation Fund. We're signing MOUs with the European Defence Agency. We're trying to boost our partnerships with the Commission, and just trying to bring in more knowledge into the EIB and what we're doing. Next slide, and we can talk about. Okay, so what exactly will it mean for companies that approach the bank? I mean, what I've flagged on this slide is a case study of the X6 Airbus helicopter, which the bank appraised. I think it's about 2 years ago, and had to turn down because too large a percentage of the project revenues would have gone to the military. The X6 had both military and civilian customers, and it was in the end not able to be financed by the bank. But now that's a project which, if appraised under the new rules, we would be able to finance. Next slide, please. Okay, there should be a graphic next to that, but it hasn't come through. Okay, so for SMEs, when we talk about defense SMEs, we're talking about SMEs that have customers in the defense sector, but again also have customers in the civilian sector. Previously, any customers from the military or security and police would have made SMEs ineligible for EIB finance. So that has now been switched so that we can at least support SMEs that have defense customers, as long as it's not the main activity of the SME. Next slide, please. A couple more, because that was it was a sequence. Next slide. Okay, so a couple of examples of projects we've signed since the new action plan was approved. The Polish satellite program is a 300 million euro loan to BGK, the Polish National Promotional Bank, for 2 satellites, which will be managed by the Polish Defense Ministry. In times of conflict, they will have military purpose, and in times of peace, they will have civilian purpose. So that's quite a nice example of dual use, and in a way which I think suits what the member states are asking the bank to do without policy change. The next slide is a most recent project under the defense strategy, which is expanding a port in Denmark to allow NATO ships to be able to come in and out of the port of Eksberg. Sorry for the pronunciation, which I think is with the focus that the EU has on military mobility and moving equipment and military capabilities across Europe more quickly, I think goes in a good direction of how the EIB can support European Defence Cooperation without necessarily weapons and ammunition financing. We're looking at across the suite of what the needs are, and I think military mobility is one, which is most military projects are dual use, so that they're usually eligible for the bank financing. Okay, next slide, please. The Defence Equity Facility is a partnership we have with DG DEFIS, where 100 million from the European Defence Fund and I think 75 million from the European Investment Fund has been put together to create a facility for SMEs, which can take equity into sort of smaller companies and closer to startups that have quite a lot of innovation and would normally be too high risk for support from EIB. Even our instruments aimed at venture debt would have been not able to support them. So it's the money from the European Defence Fund allows us to take a first loss and a guarantee just to help support those companies. Next slide. The department in Luxembourg, which I've just joined, which is the Defence and Security Office. I think we felt this was needed because I think across the bank we have different instruments for different sizes of companies, different pools of knowledge, and for security and defence, it's quite a specialised set of capabilities that we need to bring to the clients, and we do have large clients in the defence sector. I mean, Leonardo is a client, Thales is a client, Airbus is a client. So what we need to do is figure out how best to serve their defense and security projects in the same way we've been servicing the aerospace and other projects. And this new department will help us to do that. Okay, I have a final slide and then I'll finish. Just an example of a bit of the early analysis we've done in-house in Luxembourg as to where the gaps are. I know Edith spoke to this as well, but how we think we can help bridge them. We've identified a gap of 1.3 billion for R&D spending across member states, gaps in SME equity and gaps in SME debt, which the EIB probably is best placed to try and target. And we've also, in the same exercise, tried to pick out some of the niche sectors which the bank can finance automatically. So quantum, semiconductor space, sensing technologies, all of those important medium-term capabilities that Europe needs are eligible for the bank's financing. And I will finish by saying that we're also following the EU Council conclusions for this week, and we remain engaged with the defense industry, with Jan, with the Commission, with NATO, and we'll be trying to do as much as we can and push our instruments as flexibly as we can, given the guidance we have from our leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much to each of you for painting such a clear picture as to where industry lies, what the barriers you see in terms of sustainability, ESG criteria, access to finance, and for the Commission, EIB to coming forward and stating that's exactly the case, and that you have a shared vision, so to say, on the needs and barriers with the industry. It was also interesting to see in terms of what the EIB has done, as I know you a lot under pressure. The question, I have a few questions and then I'll open the floor. The question, Jan, I would have for you is, thank you for painting this picture in terms of where Europe stands in global military expenditure on defense and how far behind we are actually. How do you think, how to reach the balance between short-term and long-term needs? Short-term meaning the depleted equipment that we still need to acquire, and the long-term, for example, in terms of defense capabilities. How to balance the two? Thank you.
A tricky question to have a quick answer to. I think, first of all, when it comes to balancing the two, I think you need to be able to not balance one towards the other. I think you need to address both of them at the same time. Obviously, for the reasons of Russia being at war with Ukraine, you need to give priority to the scale up of the production in Europe and in NATO countries as such, to be able to support Ukraine. So if you would call that the short-term perspective, no one has a clue how long this war will go on, but this is still something that we hope that one day we can close the history books and we can take the next step, right? But in that next step, I think we can't wait until then to start thinking about how to deal with the challenges that we have then, because I think the first thing that will happen when the war is over, I mean, generally speaking, it is difficult to have the public support for huge defense spendings when you are at peace, right? And when the war is over, there's a huge risk that the minor increase, if I may say so, that we are ramping up now, that will be questioned. Can't we use that money for other purposes directly after the war, and we would fall back into pre-war investments, whilst we should rather realize that in the long-term perspective, we are lagging far behind, and now we need just to continue to escalate, right? And the problem with that is, what do you do with those investments if you are not at war? How do you keep what we call in industry ever warm capabilities, meaning that you are de facto ready to handle an emergency situation? If there would be a new outbreak, a new war, you would immediately be able to ensure that you can deliver the quantity and the quality of the production of the products that the armed forces are calling for at any time, at any place, to keep Europe safe, right? To have that kind of production capacity ready, but not use it. How do you finance that? And how do you deal with the balance in terms of all the other areas where you would need to compromise with national budgets? And I think the missing component in EU. So I mean, this is maybe just helping to paint the picture, but the missing component in EU, which I see actually existing on the US side, is the public discussion about the fact that security and defense and security is an insurance policy that must be allowed to have a price. And that public discussion takes place everywhere in the US. It takes place at schools, at workplaces, at home, and it's driven by a very strong common understanding on the industry side as well as in the White House, regardless of who is in the White House. So this is a process that constantly goes on, and it's recognized in the US that would you drop your budgetary spendings on the defense side because the globe would be a safer place, would you drop it for let's say 10 years or so, and then you would have a different situation and you would need to upscale again, then you simply would take you some 10 or 15 or 20 years to rebuild what you had, simply because you don't have the facilities, you don't have the engineers, you don't have the skills or the competence, the personnel, etc. So you can't, when you give something up in defense, it's very slow processes. You give something up in defense, you can't pour down money into the system and think that that transforms into capabilities. It is a 10 or 15 years process. So the one element that is missing is the public debate. And the one mistake that we make, if I may, here in Brussels, is that we too often speak about what we can do in terms of the EU instruments. I think the Commission has done an extraordinary good job at a very high pace. I think what is happening in the EIB is super, but I'm lacking the responsible member states that can actually drive the big agenda on this one, and they escape from this dialogue.
Let's hope with the next Commission, perhaps there will be changes in that regard. And I think, thank you very much. I think it helps to draw attention to that from the industry point of view. Thank you very much. Edith, the question I would have for you is that indeed what Jan said, on one hand, it's absolutely impressive and striking how in such a short period of time, the Commission put forward specific emergency instruments. At the same time, some deadlines have been missed, for example, in terms of support for Ukraine, the 1 million shells that we set the target deadline for ourselves. Now we have a defense equity facility, EDIS, EDTIB. How can we ensure that we will deliver? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. So I think EDIS and the DETIB have to be seen as a comprehensive package. And there are several problems identified in the European Defence Industrial Strategy, and we try to tackle all these problems, be it capacity, be it procurement, from different angles. I think the way EDIS is trying to pave the way for a more competitive and agile EDTIB is really to look at all angles. And here we have the demand side, which is very important, the joint procurement and joint programming functions, which have been also proposed. And I think this is also part of what Jan said, how are we ensuring that we don't fall back all the time in these cycles? And this is part, or this can be part of the solution, because demand, aggregated, more aggregated demand, more joint programming, more joint procurement, also ensure that the business remains sustainable. So this is more of a really gives it a longer term vision. On the supply side, and this is then coming to EDTIB and the financial envelope, here we are trying to ensure that the defense-related products remain available under all circumstances, so that we have an industry which is there in tensions and which can react also should there be a need for it. So the financial toolbox proposed under EDTIB is precisely for these defense-related products. And then in EDIS, we also have this very important work stream under which we have the access to finance, which is mainstreaming defense industrial readiness in all EU policies. So this is a really forward-looking action, and we also commit the Commission to make sure that when we have the next MFF, once we will look at the cohesion funds, once there is the discussion about the next InvestEU, it is made sure that the defense industry can benefit from all these funds to the best extent possible, because it is not only a matter of EDTIB and the direct management and the programs, but it should be really a comprehensive approach by the Commission towards the industry to make sure that it can deliver if it comes to that. Because when we were in this scenario of the ammunition and shells, we came from very, very low, and we are coming, we are slowly arriving at the promise, but of course the capacities had to be built, and also the mainstreaming implies that we make defense investable, and this gives you the answer to the question of today's seminar. So this is what the Commission committed to, and we also hope that then the member states will follow and then do the same.
Thank you very much. Oliver, I have one question for you. How do you explain to a EU taxpayer like myself, like many of us here, that on the one hand, it's EIB's third priority, defense and security, and we did have President Nadia Calvino here at the beginning of June, where she very clearly set out the vision. But at the same time, you cannot invest in core defense. The citizens do expect EU Bank as the world's largest multilateral finance institution to, be the front runner when it comes to high needs that we see in the industry and on the market. How do you explain that to EU taxpayer? And what would it take for the EIB to invest in core defense? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, when we talk about core defense, we're talking about weapons and ammunition, and I think the issue that we've come across, because we have been asked to do that, and we've looked at the of course we've looked at what would be the implications be for the bank if it was to make that leap. The reason we haven't done it so far is because unlike, for example, a commission instrument which is using EU budget, the bank it's not really using taxpayers' money on an annual basis. It's raising its own money on the bond market. So we have this AAA rating, which is key to supporting multiple policy priorities across Europe with as cheaper finance as possible. And it seems that I think it's a bit of a societal question, maybe getting to what Jan was talking about earlier, that there's still, despite the war in Ukraine, still not a large movement from banks and other investors into the defense sector. We haven't seen many commercial banks change their policies to go further, and I think that impacts on the bank, because those are the banks, those are the financiers which are buying our bonds. So what we're trying to do is have a constant discussion with those investors to see how far can we go, how far can we support the defense sector without triggering some sort of increase in pricing for the bank because less investors are buying our bonds. And I think we've calibrated that quite well with the member states, and I think the new action plan has delivered to a large extent an increase in just the number of defense companies, both large and small, that the bank can support, because a lot of their a lot of projects are not that Europe needs. Okay, of course, it needs ammunition and weapons, but medium term, a lot of R&D for the defense sector is also coming from space, from robotics, from cyber security, and other resilience priorities, also like chips and semiconductors and mobility, like I talked about earlier. So we've identified those sectors as areas where the bank can support without affecting our financing model, the AAA rating, which is also the guidance we have from the council.
I think you need both. You need hardcore military defense as well as more defense technologies. Now, I'd like to open the floor. Would anyone like to ask a question? Yes, please. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. Philippe Lefebvre, British Chamber of Commerce Defence Advisor, former EU NATO. You have, of course, NATO that sets the operational and strategic requirements, the EU that incentivizes and regulates, and the member states / allies who are both the buyers and, of course, the main recipients of both NATO and EU activities. If you look at those three links here, which one is the weakest in your opinion? Either sort of NATO, EU and its cooperation with member states or ability to coordinate member state spending, or indeed potentially, although NATO will get onto perhaps later, and obviously that's more innovation rather than operational side of things, could be perhaps an area you might also critique. I'm keen on hearing your point, your beliefs of where that triangle is weakest and how we can strengthen it further. Thank you.
And to whom is your question?
All three parts scan and edit mostly.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for the question. It's a very good one, and I'll stick my neck out a bit here because we don't have something like an ASD position to answer that. So it'll be more my own thinking. But I am convinced from my own perspective that the weakest link in this triangle is the member states. I want to be clear on that. I say that because all the activities that we see from the European Commission now are, I mean, intended to be different sorts of catalysts to increase the cooperation between member states, simply because the track record of military or defense industrial cooperation between member states is really lousy in Europe. It's a disaster. And we've had the discussion, if you listen to for example, an EDA conference 10 years ago, it was about harmonization of military requirements. If you listen to the same conference today, it still talks about the same topics. Member states have simply not been able to come together and harmonize, and this is why we have all of these different versions of the 155 millimeter ammunition now as an extra nice example of what it actually means, and still we continue to have tons of different instruments to try to incentivize member states to come together. So to me, I think the elephant in the room is really, if I may address that, I think the elephant in the room is really that we, on the one hand, we say none of us can deal with defense alone. There is no nation in Europe anymore that can handle its own security alone. We need to do much more at the European level. And at the same time, as soon as we try, we fall back in a de facto position and say defense is a national prerogative. Yes, it is. And look at what it has led to so far. Is it time to change that? So, I mean, I would really put the weakest spot on the member states.
Maybe just to complement from the EU side, of course, it is not up to me to comment on how the NATO and the NATO allies and the member states who are NATO allies work together. I think from the EU's perspective, indeed, coming together and the joint programming and more joint procurement and incentivizing the member states to cooperate and collaborate more is of essence. And many of the actions we are proposing are aiming to do precisely that. We cannot force the member states to cooperate more in the area of defense, but with the proposed actions, this is what we are trying to foster. I think an important element is also EU and NATO. Of course, we have our respective roles, and the strategy also acknowledges and respects the competencies, but we also really want to reinforce cooperation with the strategic partners and the like-minded partners. And this is also a very important element of the future of the strategy and then the future actions.
We could take one more question, if anyone. Yes, you were first there, so yes, yes.
Yes, hello, Michael Buska. I'm working for EDTIB, a consultancy, and I actually have a question to the Commission, because we're talking about the fact that investing in defense is actually a substantial contribution to society, and that's given. But then the EIB says, okay, we need signs from the capital market that they are moving proactively into the direction of investing in defense. So in the end, it will come to the point that you need kind of an official sign, at least from what I think, for an official sign, an official stick, an official plaque somewhere that says, okay, investing in defense is good for investors. And I'd be interested in whether you could like take us on board as to whether there are discussions inside the Commission, probably between DEFIS and FISMA. Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be only the taxonomy, but this is maybe the evident thing, to have like a really like positive inclusion of the defense industry in that, like in the financial ratings, and what's going on there, if you have exchanges there, and what's the lines of communications. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this extremely pertinent question. And I mean, as you also said, the Commission, but the EU as a whole already gave very clear statements on the importance of the defense industry for social sustainability. The strategy had this statement, which is a Commission communication together with the High Representative, but also in the ASAP regulation, which is a EU regulation. So it is adopted by our co-legislators, the Council and the Parliament. There was this very explicit statement that without peace, there is no social sustainability, and the defense industry contributes to this social sustainability. How many investors do read the recitals of the ASAP regulation? That's questionable, and we are very well aware of this problem. And in EDIS, in the European Defence Industrial Strategy, one of the main actions we committed to is make sure that in the future there is a much more straightforward. It's difficult to say at this stage what this will be, but some kind of potential label or recognition of the defense industry as a crucial contributor to sovereignty and security and defense. So the answer is yes. This was a commitment in EDIS, and we are working on it. But of course, this is not something which will pop out in the coming weeks or months. So this is a much more longer term reflection, and I think this is also then going together with this mainstreaming of defense readiness idea and seeing how this whole thinking can be built in the future EU programs under the next MFF. Of course, we are in a very peculiar year because we had the European elections, and we will have a new commission hopefully very soon, and this commission will have its own priorities. So we'll see how this will evolve then. And then very soon, of course, we will have to start the work on the new MFF because our current MFF is until 27. So this will be also potentially a very good moment to reflect on it. But the answer is yes, we have a very good collaboration, DG FISMA and DG DEFIS, and also in the past, so we all work together on EDIS and then guidance on taxonomy and EU sustainable framework with our FISMA colleagues.
Thank you very much. And Jan, I think, wants to add something, please.
So I'll be happy to come in and complement what we just heard on that. I mean, from my perspective, this is also absolutely clear. The Commission has been incredibly clear about the importance to invest in defense and that there is no contradiction with sustainability in a number of documents, as we've heard here. The problem is, though, that even if the Commission is clear on that, this is not an instruction that the financial community is either seeing or having to obey to. And from a practical perspective, I can just, as a comment on that, I can just say that there is, for example, there's this responsible investors conference taking place in London soon. I don't recall exactly now if it's in June or if it's on the other side of the summer vacation. But they, anyway, they claim to be one of the biggest conferences in the world dealing with sustainable investment, and they have investors all over the globe coming to that conference. We saw the agenda. We tried to knock on the door, tried to be there. But first of all, we were refused. And secondly, these new policy statements from the Commission is not even on the agenda, not in a single panel. They will not deal with anything like these new policy statements from the Commission. And they claim to be the ones developing the sustainable investment guidance for the community. So that's a problem, the disconnect.
Thank you very much. We will now move to the second round of discussions between NATO, Lithuanians INVEGA, and Ukrainians crowdfunding Prytula Foundation. If I could just ask the events team, Viktorija Trimbel should be connected online. She landed and she is in a safe place to join us. We are looking forward to seeing her on the screen. And we will start with NATO. Philip, there's a lot of excitement about venture capital funds, defense technologies, deep tech. Could you tell us more about NATO's innovation fund, as well as Diana, what market gaps they're trying to plug, and if you could share also some best practice examples. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming to this, I think, very timely discussion. It's extraordinarily important for what we're facing today. So maybe just before I introduce this concept of Diana, the NATO Innovation Fund, and the initiatives that we've launched over the last couple of years, just to do a little bit of a scene set. Innovation at NATO formally is relatively new in the sense of we came about in late 2019 and early 2020. And the whole idea of the innovation unit is really to focus on the opportunities and risks related to emerging and disruptive technologies. All capital letters, which is, I guess, a formal term, but really what it means is deep tech. We have a number of verticals that we have identified as being very critical to the future of conflict, from AI and autonomy to quantum biotechnologies, novel materials and advanced manufacturing, next generation communication networks, energy propulsion. I think you kind of get the flavor as to what we're talking about. These technologies, I think, are just easiest in describing as deep tech, which is the way that industry tends to think about them. And they have a few features. There tends to be more of a hardware basis. So in other words, we are focusing more on things that have a physical component or capability. We've had a revolution in terms of bits over the last couple of decades in our society. Now we're moving on to bits and atoms and the intersection between those two and technologies that engage both of those components in most cases. Deep tech also means that these are technologies that are there to solve problems. And I'm going to come back to that when I talk a little bit more about defense adoption and issues that we face in procurement and acquisition of technologies. When we started to think about EDTs, we wanted to look at where these markets currently are, because once upon a time, it were our defense industries, both on the government side and the industrial side, that was really driving a lot of innovation across our society. We have technologies like the internet and rockets and GPS, mRNA vaccines that we used so recently in the pandemic. All of these stemmed from defense-driven R&D applications. But sometime between about the mid-2000s and the mid-90s and the mid-2000s, we found that actually government or public spend on R&D, especially defense-related spend, had been far superseded by private sector spend on early-stage investment into innovative technologies. And so today, that X in terms of on the graph that you would see is actually revealing a very significant and extraordinary gap. Recently, we had representatives from Microsoft as well as Amazon coming to NATO headquarters to talk about the amount that they're spending in the world of quantum, biotechnologies, artificial intelligence, and the drive on the frontier here is driven by companies such as those investors, whether those are early stage venture capital investors, private equity investors, and so on, really looking for the next set of innovation. Another point that I would drive at is that these EDT domains that we're talking about have been undercapitalized, especially at the startup stage of driving technological innovation for quite some time. Modern day financial funds tend to have run times in the 7-8 year mark, and they tend to be going for that power law return on investment. And so what that means is we've had a tremendous amount of investment into business B2B technologies and to software as a service related technologies or consumer related technologies, but investors have shied away from investing in quantum startups or in semiconductors or whatnot. And there's reasons for that. These are risky technologies. We're talking about often fundamental science. Hardware is hard by definition. There's a reason why Google has failed. Apple seems to have been able to do it very well. And Microsoft has had mixed results over the last 2 decades. And so we are seeing that private sector VC, especially in early stage, hasn't been allocating the capital that we would have seen across the entire alliance, whether you're in the United States, UK, Germany, or whether you're on our eastern flank. The other issue that we do see for the alliance is that there's an undercapitalization of EDTs outside of the United States. So when you look at valuations of early stage startups across the alliance, you have the United States and then really everyone else. Even I think if you look at valuations in the UK or Germany versus valuations in, for example, Poland or Lithuania or Latvia, they're not actually all that different compared to the gap that we see between the United States and the rest of the alliance. And that's a critical concern for us when, for example, Microsoft employs more engineers from Romania than from any other nation in the world, just as an aside. So what that means is there's tremendous technical and technological expertise outside of the United States and across the rest of the alliance. But if that exists, but there isn't necessarily capital to fund that innovation that is coming across the rest of the alliance, that's a huge issue, because what we're talking about in the defense and security context is that next game-changing technology that allows us to maintain our technological edge, because everything that we're doing is rested under this idea that our defense and deterrence actually is underpinned by our technological edge that the alliance has been able to maintain for the last 75 years. We're not really in that position anymore where our technological edge is as strong as it has been. And then I think the last aspect that I would say is on that technological edge front, we have our strategic competitors, our adversaries that are putting tremendous amount of funding into technology, into innovation for defense-related purposes. And when you have concepts like civil fusion, it's a lot easier for innovation that's happening in the civilian sector to be applied and to be taken up in the defense space. We're not necessarily seeing that here in the alliance, where there's a funding gap, and we have a societal problem where for much of the last couple of decades or so, defense-related spending has been a pariah type term. So if those are the fundamental issues that we've been looking at, and we really started identifying that in about 2020, we've had some responses to that. And we think about this very much in respect of our work with startups and startup companies, because we recognize you have lots of R&D and research in universities, but unless those technologies can actually commercialize and transition and go to market, or innovation happening in core defense, unless we can transition that and make that commercially accessible, all of that private sector funding towards innovative technologies is something that we're not able to capture. And so we're missing out on that capitalistic economy that I think can provide drivers towards innovation and towards spending, including in the dual use and defense related spaces. So we like to think of this in terms of 2 valleys of death, and we've been looking to solve both of these valleys. You have development of technologies so that you can get to a prototype of some sort, and then you have a second valley of death in terms of funding, which is how do you actually get technologies and products into the hands of our armed forces, into the hands of the proverbial warfighter, the operator. So with that, we came up with Diana and the NATO Innovation Fund. And the idea was, what if we can think of a pipeline where, first of all, we can do what NATO often does and does very well, which is to collate the most critical problems, requirements that we face in the military space, both now and in the future. What if we can collate demand signals from across the alliance as step one? Step number two, what if we have an accelerator network for companies that are working on emerging and disruptive technologies? And what if we can accelerate the development of their product and bring them together with our operators, with our warfighters, so that the technologies they're developing have more relevance to those warfighters? Number three, what if we can create a venture capital fund that's based on market economy principles and operates in a way such as to crowd in private sector capital alongside its own capital to provide funding, long-term funding necessary for some of these products? And then last but not least, what if we can look at the way that we have our own procurement acquisition authorities and to create new mechanisms for public adoption of these technologies, or even public-private partnerships to sponsor the acquisition of these technologies? So that is the pipeline that we like to think of in the NATO context. Originally, Diana and the NATO Innovation Fund were one concept. We ultimately decided to move the fund out of the Diana concept so that we could actually operate under those market principles and outside of the NATO banner with some of our own regulations and requirements as an international body. We thought that it would actually operate more effectively in a private sector, quasi-private public mechanism. So just to describe what these initiatives are, I'll start off with Diana. I think of Diana as a product accelerator or a capability accelerator in some sense. Diana is a mechanism by which every 2 years, the nations come together and at a strategic level identify core problems that Diana can solve. And one thing that I just want to highlight is we are trying to get away from the world of military requirements and to start calling them problems and challenges. And this is something that we've learned in the context of the Ukraine war and running up to the Ukraine war. And I'll come back to that in a second. Once Diana does that, it has this network of 200 test centers and accelerator sites that member states or allies have provided to NATO to be able to leverage and to use. And so what that means is companies that participate in Diana have the opportunity to go through accelerator programs or to leverage test center sites where they can access supercomputers, they can access extremely cold technologies if they're working on quantum, for example, at the Niels Bohr Institute. They can go to Lincoln Labs at MIT and leverage some of the facilities there on their pathway towards development. Diana is fundamentally designed with the idea of competition and market forces to act in a positive way. We like to describe it as Diana is not a zoo, it's a jungle. In other words, we want the companies and the innovators to be competing with one another. We want this to be a merit-based competitive process. We don't have juste retour as a principle baked into either Diana or the NATO Innovation Fund, because at the end of the day, we're not going for the notion of fairness, we're going for the notion of peace, and peace provided by having the most relevant product into the hands of an operator at the speed of relevance. Diana can take these companies through a process where they get to meet and engage with operators, where it can collate demand signals, engage with the nations, give them the opportunity to see what these cutting edge technologies are like. And ultimately, right now, we're working on the procurement authorities and new authorities that we can use to get these technologies quickly into the hands of operator. We've been very inspired, without going into too much detail, by a program that NASA used called COTS, the Combined Orbital Transportation System, which it ran in the late 2000s. There were two really important entities that came out of them. One of them is called SpaceX. The other one is called Northrop Grumman Space. And what they did in the context of that was, rather than provide a contract award at the beginning of how do we resupply the space station, it was milestones-based iterative development of a technology where they hedged their bets and picked several companies. They awarded tranches of the funding only when milestones were hit. One of the three companies they picked went bankrupt when they didn't hit the milestone 1 year on, but competitively, they were actually able to deliver the program under budget and under time. And that is something very complex, which is getting stuff from Earth up to the International Space Station. Just talking about the NATO Innovation Fund, this is a private sector fund. So it is a partnership based and domiciled in Luxembourg. with an entity that manages the funding on behalf of NATO. We created a bespoke company that's owned by a charity in the Netherlands with an independent board of directors that oversees its activity. The employees of the NIF have NATO security clearances, but they're private sector employees, and therefore they can be compensated and work in a way just like a market-driven VC fund. The NIF has three overarching objectives. One of them is commercial success. One of them is the adoption of dual-use technologies that can solve defense and security challenges. And the third is capacity building. How can we actually accelerate the innovation ecosystems of the 24 nations that have provided the 1 billion euros of funding for this VC fund? The NATO Innovation Fund provides early stage investments at the seed and Series A stage or sometimes beyond. It has the capability of leading investment rounds and to be the primary backer of technologies and to basically plant a flag in the stand of saying, hey, these are critical technologies that NATO believes is really critical moving forward. And we have enough money that we can finance this, the journey and the life cycle of this startup. And by virtue of having top tier venture capitalists managing this who are incentivized along market conditions, that encourages other venture capitalists to take a look and to say, hey, there's actually market opportunities here and these companies can scale and grow. One last point that I would just note is that investments into both Diana and to the NIF actually count towards 2% of defense spending. And then maybe one last point is for the NATO Innovation Fund, it's actually the first defense or dual use fund that is regulated as an ESG fund. And so we registered that and the regulator will be looking. It has all of the disclosure filing obligations requisite. It has a chief sustainability officer who's currently working on investment policies that when the NIF it does a small amount of fund of funds investing. When it does invest in other VC funds, it has defense as a core element of sustainability baked into it, which is why I think it's now entered into an MOU or entering into an MOU next week with the EIB and the Commission. I just want to move on from Diana and the NATO Innovation Fund to talk about relevance really quickly, which is that second hurdle, which is adoption. My unit has just received a mandate from allied ministers to basically spend the next year focusing on adoption at the speed of relevance across the alliance to identify what does it mean to procure and to acquire new technologies for defense and security purposes, and how can we ensure that we're doing that in a way that is much quicker and much more relevant than historically we've been able to do that. Ukraine has been a tremendous driver of this. We are seeing innovation cycles in a 3 months window, as quickly as you have operators at the forward line of contact who are requesting some sort of a technology or often a drone-based or autonomous system. They're calling up someone that they know at a city 2-hour drive away. That those people are able to put together a drone or a new technology, drive it out to the front lines. They go and test that for 24, 48 hours. They use it, give feedback to the company that is back in Kiev or wherever. They then send the engineer back. They 3D print 500 meters behind the forward line of contact. And there you go. You have an iteration on a technology. And right now you're seeing Ukraine or Russia instituting a new technology, the other side being a little bit shaken by what that means, and then quickly coming up with some sort of a countermeasure. And that cycle has been going on every 3 months or so. What that means is our traditional procurement mechanisms where we're doing forecasting of here's what we have to have in 7 years. Well, we have a conflict that's evolving every 3 months. And so that means that we need to think both short term in terms of how can we develop technologies in a new way? How can we think of hardware and capabilities as a service that can be very quickly evolved to meet operator needs and to meet the speed and pace of conflict today? So I think just to close as a final, we are shifting from requirements to setting problems. We don't want to be the ones saying what we need. We want the innovators of the alliance to tell us how they can solve our problems in the most effective way. Number two, we believe in co-development with innovators so that we're not just providing a capability on X date at Y cost. Instead, it's more of a living capability that is co-developed between the operator and between the innovator. Number three, there's a critical importance of having strategic support in the work that we do, which is why we're framing these demand signals at the level of national armaments directors, at the level of ministers on board. And number four, we're looking at ways to incentivize risk-taking by the individuals within government, allies or NATO, or the EU, who are responsible for procurement or acquisition-related decision-making.
Thank you for this fascinating presentation. Thank you very much. We will go now to our next speaker, that's Viktorija Trimbel. I would like to very warmly welcome Viktorija. She just landed in France from the US after a very long flight. Thank you, Viktorija, for being here, and the floor is yours. Can we put up the slides, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Just checking the sound. Do you hear me well?
Yes, just one moment. Tatiana, could you give me okay when it's, yes? Go ahead.
So thanks once again for opportunity to share Lithuanian examples. And yes, indeed, I just landed from the delayed flight, so I'm speaking from the airport, so apologies for the background noise. So I will be sharing Lithuanian experience, and if you could move to the next slide. The way I see the state of affairs at the moment in Europe and in Lithuania in particular is that change is accelerating. We still are lagging behind defense investments in United Americas, but for example, just in Lithuania alone, in last February, we still had like 0 venture capital available. Right now, we estimate to have about 77 million euros of committed capital, which could be deployed in dual use and defense. And, you know, up to 2 billion or even more can come from various financial instruments and other partners like NATO Innovation Fund or European Defense Fund, and also defense loans that our holding company INVEGA is offering to the market. Next slide, please. We believe that borderline countries, they know very well what's happening because we've just been under Russian occupation. And if you see into the NATO countries that are spending more than 2% of GDP, so this is the blue color. Those are the borderline countries who take the neighbor as a kind of existential threat, and that's why we invest a lot. Just yesterday, our Minister of Defense has announced that Lithuanian investments in defense will exceed 3% of GDP, and the budget changes have been already approved. Next slide, please. So those changes, what I see accelerating, are in multiple areas. So first of all, there are major changes in legislation, in the laws that would enable acceleration of the defense industry. So that the permits for construction, for land plots are being issued faster, that if there are some misalignments in the laws, particular for A-class guns, they will be also changed. The parliament has just approved changes in taxation, adding extra 1% to multiple taxes, including profit tax, so that there will be a sustainable funding for defense budgets going forward. And we have also extensions and specialized change funds, VC funds in the country, also accelerators, pre-accelerators, and multiple hackathons that are focusing on defense and dual use solutions. So the ecosystem which is now being built at the increasing speed is very cooperating and engaged. And another important aspect is also united society, that we have quite unique examples in Lithuania. Please, next slide. So if we move to next slide. What kind of capital is being pulled? No, one slide back with the figures. So INVEGA, as a national development agency, it is an anchor LP in all venture capital funds. And at the moment, there are 3 funds that have mandate permission to invest in defense and dual use. So our fund is the first and the largest. We are getting extra 15 million, so we'll be having about 25 million of dry powder to invest in different sectors. And also important aspect is that we are sovereign funds to a certain extent, like NATO Innovation Fund. Our capital is 100% public money of Lithuanian state or European Union. So we are also permitted to invest in pure defense solutions, not necessarily dual use, except retail trade in arms. Baltic Sandbox Ventures is another fund which has also pre-accelerator program. So they focus on life sciences and deep tech, which is often dual use. And then we have a quite unique specialized fund, which is doing only defense investments, also having pre-accelerator and accelerator with a scale vault. And then INVEGA, as an LP, has invested into the NATO Innovation Fund, and out of the Recovery and Resilience program, defense loans have been offered to the market. Moreover, we are having defense grants and innovation vouchers, Our Ministry of Defense is also creating and launching designated programs for research and development and procurement for various solutions that are needed to the military, and then a multiple of new instruments are appearing almost every week or every month in other European countries that we would expect to have cooperation later. Next slide, please. If we can move to next slide. So what major risk we see as investor? So first of all, it's very important that innovators and startups would be solving real problems, not just, like invented. And when we don't have a compulsory service in the army, some of the younger engineers and developers, they don't really understand the actual needs of the military, and military has a kind of secretive structure, which was not really open for the dialogue until up to recently. So it's very important to have a dialogue that there are real problems solved. Then we have certain misalignment of different cycles. So it takes from 5 to 15 years to design a truly new innovation. It might take 5 to 8 years for defense procurement processes up till now. And then for traditional VC funds, it's usually 5 years to invest and 5 years to exit. So that's why we also see sovereign funds like NATO Innovation Fund or Coinvest Capital very well positioned for that kind of investments because they have patient capital. Now, another risk area is making and moving money. When I had the discussions with MOD, they were saying, Viktorija, can you guarantee me that the startup will survive, during 5 or 8 years? Because this is how long we plan in advance our procurement. And my answer was, I cannot guarantee you that, but I can guarantee you for sure that the startup will die after 1 or 2 years if there will be no procurement programs from the military in place. So another important issue which also has to be solved and addressed is commercial banking. If we have prime contractors, huge companies, for them it's okay to wait 5 months when a transaction or banking transfer is being frozen and checked by commercial bank or refused for that matter. But for the startup, it would mean, really a question of life or death. And commercial banks are a bit reluctant due to their own, regulations and burden of compliance to deal with companies that are working in dual use and defense space. Another important issue is what they call bad apples, which make companies non-investable. We need to have proper instruments in place to check reputation of the founders of co-investors. We do have some, I'll touch upon that later, but an area of improvement would be done here as well. And then, of course, for every VC investor, it's important to have your exit strategy. Eventually, we want our shares to be bought by, other large company, trade sale, mergers, acquisitions. I don't really plan IPOs at the moment because we invest early stage. Next slide, please. So what we do to mitigate the risk? First of all, we are building cooperating MilTech ecosystem. Then we are really trying to have different platforms and to have a secure and engaged dialogue with the military, with decision makers, with inventors, and with the capital providers. In terms of the reputation protection, the bad apples, what I mentioned, our fund, we are applying what I call 3 lines of defense. First of all, we screen our investment partners because we often invest with business angels and also the founders of the company, existing investors using the tools that are at our disposal. I would say traditional AML, KYC tools, and also interviewing them. Then before, signing the actual contract, we go through the National Security Committee clearance. And then we also have clauses in our contract, which basically says, if you have hidden something that would preclude you from co-investing with us before the deal, we have the right to buy out your shares at nominal value. If something happens later, then there are other pricing mechanisms, but basically we have protection also in the contracts that we could clean the company after the deal if we need so. And being a sovereign fund, but I'm also speaking with our authorities, I would like to have certain instruments officially, legally at my disposal before, finalizing the deal, because the current national security clearance that we have, it's a little bit at late stage. We have already invested a lot. We hope that, no bad, discoveries will be made, but if we could have, certain checkup earlier, that would help us in building the deal. Now, for R&D environment, we also have structures that enable inventors to move from the labs and garages to the actual ranges of the military and also front lines, and in particular with the help, with the combined effort of private and public cooperation and several specific NGOs that I would like to mention next. Please move to another slide. So this is the general drawing of the ecosystem what we have at the moment. I won't stop long here, but basically we have a Miltech sandbox with the innovation agency, which is like a single point of contact, which is now starting to provide defense innovation grants. They are launching now procurement process, feasibility study, and there is a plan to have a designated Miltech lab procurement vendor next year, so that there will be a safe and secure space for innovations to happen. And on this slide, we also have representatives of the armed forces, of the academia, of the funds who provide capital, and business and startup communities. Next slide, please. So few NGOs, what we have, in fact, today they celebrate 105 years anniversary, Rifleman Union. It's a paramilitary organization where citizens join, they get some training, and then they can choose either kinetic or non-kinetic service. So basically, these people are, you could say, patriotic. They are spending their own money, as Commander says, for the right to get killed if the war will start. But why we see them very much as cooperation partners? So because of how they are structured into the defense system by the law, so they do have a better understanding of the military needs. And moreover, especially after open invasion in Ukraine started, a lot of businessmen joined as members to the Rifleman Union. So we see them both as a potential originators of future startups, or also as co-investors in the startups alongside our fund. And they also have competences. They operate very closely with Ukrainian armed forces, with Lithuanian armed forces. So we can partner with them to have a much faster testing of the innovations to make sure that we fit the needs of the military. Next slide, please. Another unique NGO is Blue Yellow. They started supporting Ukrainian soldiers back in 2014. And in fact, they are number 2 in the world, according to Forbes, in terms of how much capital they raised to do that. The difference from majority of other NGOs is, as they say, the others are usually taking care of the victims, like post, war refugees, and injured people, veterans. Blue Yellow is supporting the soldiers, providing them with equipment so that there are less victims later. And they have various interesting campaigns how to raise funds, starting from the allocation what we have in Lithuanian law. So every citizen can tell the government where he or she wants to allocate 1.2% of its personal taxes paid. So people can choose Blue Yellow. Then, for example, you can have digitalized soldier, contributing certain funds. We have gift vouchers. So by now they raised already 80 million euros. And where we cooperate with Blue Yellow, so we ask from them contacts when we do due diligence, and also through them our startup founders can get a faster access closer to the front lines to actually test the innovations. And for example, in the area of drones or electronic warfare, the environment is changing so rapidly. So, both sides are innovating, and ability to have this quick access really helps to innovate fast. Next slide, please. Just to mention a couple other initiatives, why our society is so united, and why I mentioned at the beginning, we know what it is to be in the Soviet occupation. So Lithuania was the first to crowdfund military drones. Prior to this initiative by Bayraktar, nobody has ever done that. And by now, we have lots of other different initiatives happening on a larger scale every year on the anniversary of the open invasion, but also there are multiple NGOs where society is supporting Ukrainians, and they also serve us in getting innovations and getting the needs from Ukraine fast. Next slide, please. So where's the opportunities? So as for European Union, I would like to see more cross-border clusters of excellence, because especially for smaller countries, we cannot excel at everything, and to make innovation fast, we need to focus on something what we are good already at. And for sovereign VC funds or other VC funds that have public money as anchor LP in the capital, usually politicians set requirements to have investments made locally, and sometimes I see that as a limiting factor for the fast innovation. So I think we need to find the ability to do more cross-border innovations, cooperations also from the VC perspective, especially as NATO is speaking about joint procurement, so we should have joint development. And as mentioned, the sovereign funds like NATO Innovation Fund or Coinvest Capital are really much better positioned for that kind of risk profile. I also see Lithuania as an agile partner with synergy of interest. So we have this unique funding model, and we are trailblazing in different sorts of funding innovations. I'll tell more later about a unique profit sharing incentive that Coinvest Capital is offering. And our holding company, INVEGA, is already an LP in multiple VC funds, and they also provide direct defense loans to companies in defense industry. Next slide, please. So briefly about our fund, how we operate. So we have a unique in the world generous profit sharing scheme. When we invest into startup, we need at least 3 co-investors alongside us. It could be business angels, it could be corporate VCs, it could be other VCs. And as long as those partners don't have public money in the capital, they could participate in the profit sharing. Profit sharing means that at exit, we only keep 6% return, and we transfer surplus to the partners. So real case, Interactio invested 1 million, exited after 1 year. We all made 9 times, but because our fund kept only 6% and transferred surplus profits to co-investors made 34 times. Now, why this incentive is created? Because our ecosystem is young, and I think the same applies to venture capital and defense. So this is incentive that Lithuanian state has designed to de-risk and to allow more private co-investors to go into high-risk areas. And we have interest aligned, because this benefit only works if the startup is successful. And at very early stage, what we do, it's not only the cash what is needed, but also networks, know-how, and other things. So our maximum ticket per company will grow shortly to 2 million. And this is something that, other countries could also copy with us, or we would be more than happy to cooperate and have co-investors joining our investments. Except that what I mentioned before, currently our mandate limits us to invest only in companies that at the moment of investment are registered in Lithuania. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I'm very sorry to interrupt. You have 30, 40 seconds. Really sorry about this, but we will have another speaker and we will wrap up. Thank you very much.
So I'm finishing. I just would like to address elephant in the room. When I hear the question, is it ethical to invest in defense? I can't see anything else more ethical, because this is our lives, our future that we are defending. So I think that answer should be answered for all. And yeah, I think that's kind of my probably last slide remaining. If we quickly jump to the last one. Yes, so speed of decision making is needed faster. We need to have security in place, but not over-regulate. And we have to have testing and direct dialogue with the military. And we also should accentuate the benefits and investing in deterrence, first of all, that nobody dares to attack us. So that's the short and quick message. Thank you for the opportunity to share Lithuanian experience. I'm at your disposal. My contacts are on the next slide.
Thank you very much, Viktorija. Really appreciate your time and effort. I will now turn to Olga. Olga, if we can keep it in 5 minutes, I would be very grateful. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you so much. Can you just please upload the presentation?
Would you have the slides, please, for speaker number 6? Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for such insightful discussions, and it was really, really interesting to listen all of you. So thank you so much for this. And I will be today like a voice from the fields, actually, because my daily work consists of the work with military units, with government representatives, and in humanitarian field. So please, next slide. Our foundation is one of the biggest foundation in Ukraine for today. We launched our foundation in 2014. And we are working mostly with defense forces of Ukraine and with civilians who is affected by Russian aggression. So we are really people-centered foundation, and all of our crowdfundings and all our campaigns is based only on the donations from civil society. So can please be next slide. For today, we launched almost 200 million USD, and it's covered like as a military and humanitarian fields. And the donations is still growing, but we really need support from international partners for today. So please, next slide. The core, like our directions for now of work, it's military, in which I mostly work with, humanitarian and civil awareness centers. What does it mean? We teach civilians to survive in daily life and in current conditions. At the same time, we are teaching military units on how to use drones, because we really believe that without this, it can't be much efficient on the battlefield to work in this field. Please, next slide. So what makes us unique in general? We are pioneering innovations for the army. So we are working closely with government field, and was one of the first organizations who delivered drones and Starlinks and Mavics to the battlefield and front lines, because when the war started, government unfortunately was not, and the state was not so much prepared for this, and this process was on the volunteers' shoulders, not only on our organization, and a lot of Ukrainian organizations, international ones, who just tried to do it faster with the goal of save lives. So our goal was to support in this field as much as it can be possible. At the same time, why we are unique? Because we are efficient in speed. What takes for government to deliver something for 1 year, we deliver it in 2 months. I will show it also samples a bit later. Then we are helping your defense involve. We are really trying to support new projects with robotic platforms. I will also show it later a little bit, and to try to bring new vision of Ukrainian army for today. Can be next slide, please. So our biggest crowdfunding campaign that was started from the beginning of the full-scale war, it was Bayraktars. It's like people's Bayraktars. We raised in 3 days 20 million USD dollars for 3 Bayraktars, and also we received a gift as 1 Bayraktar for the government. We are really thankful for this. So the next slide, please. The second, our project was People Satellite, and we provided it for intelligence defense forces of Ukraine, and we raised 60 million hryvnias for this, and this satellite is successfully working today. Just a few days ago, we received more photos of this work from the battlefields and shared it in. It was shared in public also, because we have a lot of questions about how it works, because we're receiving donations from the civil society in the end, and people really want to know where it goes, and it's tough to explain how the satellite works for the simple people. So the next slide, please. The second project was we collected charitable donations for 101 people's military tracked armored fighting carriers, and we delivered them also really fast, because it was used technique. It was not new technique. It's really important, because we are focusing on it, because we can really fast equip it in Ukraine and give it to the your military units. Second slide, please. No, previous one. Thank you. So yeah, the current needs are right now really broad, and on the daily basis, we're receiving a lot of requests from military units that need to be covered. It's drones, shields, optic devices, tactical medicine. We have a really huge gap still in tactical medicine, and we really need support also in this field. It's really important to mention. But I will right now to focus more on the really interesting, more modernized things. The next slide, please. FPV drones, it's our main niche on which we are really powerful, and we delivered already 16,000, as you see, FPV drones, and it's really growing up, this number, because, you know, on the battlefield, it's going really fast. So it's like daily thing for the military unit, because it's really tough to do it more. So next slide. Mobile troop control points. It's also really important thing for us for today. We are also focusing on it and try to equip it with the help of charitable donations, because we receiving this support also thanks to NATO. But these control points need to be additionally equipped, and we like also try to do it. It's also a high priority project for us. Second slide. And robots. So here we are working with Brave One. It's the official government platform, and for us, for today, the most important thing is to save lives. We don't have too much people in general, and the battlefield is super huge, and the front line is so big. And we try to modernize our army and try to invest our charitable donations and in collaboration with government, and to collect more money on such kind of things. It's like combat turrets and ground robotic platforms. And it's really, I can say right now, it's not a trend in Ukraine, but for now it's really attractive from investment side. And I think it can be really a new age on the battlefield, and it's bring new life to the new technologies in general. So what I want like to summarize, it's like our currency right now, it's like our expertise in defense, and we are really happy to share it with everyone. We really need investment for all the fields. You see the needs are really high, and yeah, and we are happy to share it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's very humbling and sobering to hear from you. And thank you very much for all that you do. Since we are very short of time, anyone would like to ask a question? No one? Then perhaps I could just ask each one of you within 10-15 seconds to tell, for the next political institutional cycle and the change of leadership within EU, but also NATO, what's your one recommendation? Thank you.
That's really a tough one. I think if you look at what we have ahead of us, I think that the EU must continue to do much more together than it has done before. We should accelerate that. And if you look at the elections coming up in UK, I know UK is not EU, but it is part of Europe. Elections in UK, elections in France, the situation in Germany, etc. My hope is really that this does not mean that the EU component will be weakened. I think what we need is more EU, and we need more EU in defense, especially. So don't lose the grip that we've started to build, but continue on the trajectory and increase the speed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jan. Edit.
I could say more money, more attention, more resources. But for the next cycle, what I really hope for, that defense and defense readiness will be an explicit priority of the next mandate.
Oliver.
I would just mention, I think, the importance of finance and defense understanding each other better. We hear a lot with our counterparts that there's an information gap with the defense sector, and I think this is something which the next commission, along with the actors here today, can help drive, making sure that industry, politics, finance in this crucial area are having better conversations. Thank you.
Really quickly, our defense ministries and to a lesser extent NATO are customers and the critical customer here. So we need to be better at how we outline what our demand signals are, what do we as customers need, which means things like looking at potential reform to the NATO defense planning process and getting better at outlining a common need that's interoperable. And on the flip side, as a customer, we need to be better to make it easier for these startups to sell to us. So looking at reforming our acquisition processes and having commitment across the allies in terms of what this speed of relevance actually is, and ensuring that we have the top cover to be able to ensure reform so that we can fulfill that.
Thank you, Viktorija.
So I would just add about cross-border cooperation. So if we have our mandate allowing us to invest in defense, I would like us also to be able to invest with neighbors in the neighboring countries, including building partnerships with Ukraine, so that we are not partnering on testing level, but also on joint ventures and joint innovation level. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Viktorija. Olga.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we really need more investment in private sector in general and more open dialogue between of the government representatives and between the different units and organizations, because for now it's like this processes start going on more quickly, but we unfortunately have not enough time to waste. Our people daily dying on the battlefields. So thank you so much.
Thank you everyone very much. And sorry, we're a few minutes past time. I would like to thank each and every speaker for your time. Heartfelt thank you, really appreciate that, as well as for the audience to come here on such a hot day, and for those who are connected online. Thank you very much, and we will be in touch with upcoming policy dialogues and roundtables in the scope of defense and security projects as we explore the different practical solutions in financing defense and security in Europe. Thank you all very much once again. Thank you.